Lewis, as you know, I have some fairly strong views on the nature of desire, pleasure, and pain. And as far as I can see, desire is effectively a blind thing that pushes all of us along. Desire for sex, desire for security, desire for money, desire for power, desire for fame. Yeah, it goes on and on and on. And some of these things create pleasures for us, and others create pain. Now, you've got some very well defined ideas around all of this, so tell me what you think about desire, pleasure, and pain.
What I found and I've learned from or through Spinoza, and you can see this in Spinoza's Ethics, um, the definition of desire. Uh, you may look it up, it's there, uh, and it's on page 173 in the Ethics, Spinoza's Ethics. It's called the Alois edition. I mean, Alois translation, Dover edition. But what does Spinoza say? He says that desire is the essence of man. What does that mean? It means, Martin, that desire is, say, built in man's nature. Actually, not only in man, but in every living thing. Desire, desire to procreate, desire to survive, desire for food, desire to quench one's thirst, to desire to go to the bathroom. All this is desire. And this, what is basically desire, is what makes up man's nature to survive. As man, when primitive man, he had some basic needs: survival. He was a gatherer, a hunter and gatherer of food. And he had shelter, a cave. And he had to protect his skin by covering it with certain um, fur or whatever. But primitive man had basic desires: survival. He had to learn how to find, to hunt, get food. He eventually, his desire for, say, procreate or to find a mate is built in. In a sense, we might say God put desire into man, if we want to use God, or say these infinite being or this thing called nature. They're all the same. Desire is not free. Everybody believes they have free will, but desire basically is built in. It helps. It's built in man. It's like it's part of his DNA. It say motivates man to exist and to survive. Depending, and so we go say the year 2000, say 17 now, and desire is hasn't changed in man. Depending on the environment you grow up in, those desires will be determined to respond to certain stimuli. A child early is developing desire at the state of infancy. A child is born, the first thing the child begins to cry. The child is hungry or the desire to breathe. Desire is man's essence to exist and persist. So what is war? What is why does man suffer? I would say man suffer is manifested from his confusion of how to take care of himself, how to preserve himself, his idea of existence, Martin. For instance, um, if an individual grew up in a family where they say they live in the South, just don't want to pick on Southern people, but this is an example. I was watching a movie, an old movie, well, about the 60s, about, say, George Wallace and Alabama and Mississippi, the southern states, and uh, where the Afro American or uh, wanted have more, say, freedom, and they felt during the 50s and 60s they were suppressed educationally. There was segregation with schools, places to eat, and they were viewed as secondary citizens. Yet they had desire to say increase their freedom, to have more freedom, to have a better education, to be able to freely eat where they wanted to be able to freely sit in a bus wherever they could sit, not just in the back of the bus. So their desire was to, it was evident. They want to be partake of citizenship. Now, the other so-called other people, and we'll call them Anglo-Saxon or white people, uh, mixtures of probably German, Irish, whatever, uh, who have a different attitude. Their attitude, their desire is to keep the races, the black race or the African American race, separate. So their desire is called suppression.
Yeah, but I mean, why did they do that? They did that to enhance their own power. This thing of it's throughout the animal world that one creature. So, for example, a lion in a pride will dominate the other lions, or it's just part of this blind drive that we call desire. And the people who discriminated against the coloured people in the south of the United States were just effectively enhancing their own power. And so they were going to be resistant to the coloured people gaining some power of their own, and hence you end up with a civil war, which is basically what seemed to happen in the United States
Yeah.
a few hundred years ago. It gets to that pitch, and I get what you're saying, that these desires are nature's way for man to survive, and so on and so forth. But if you look at the animal world, then basically man is just like this animal with a super big brain that now has atom bombs and so on. So the damage he can do isn't just to another animal; he can do it to a whole continent. So
Absolutely, absolutely,
yeah,
Martin. Absolutely. And this is where what this work, what we're endeavoring to do, there's such a thing as being a conscious individual, of being awakened, as Gurdjieff would say, an awake state. Spinoza calls it the understanding, the true intelligence. See, man has been given this great gift called the mind. But however, the mind in most individuals is passive. And man lives by the first level of knowledge. What does that mean? He lives by hearsay and experience. This is the lowest level of knowledge. At this level of knowledge, man will say, try to dominate other men. They live in the ego state. This is a state of imagination, which is not, I would say, a very low level of understanding. It's a low quality. An ego state is a very poor quality. It's a false state of being. The other possibility of man is coming to what is called a clear state of being, the understanding. It's a conscious state. However, when most men, I would say 99% of mankind, including women, live in this unconscious state. So they're driven by the desires. And if they grow up in an environment, and this is where it was so amazing to me to see children scream and yell and be cruel to these children who are trying to be part of this school that was dominated by white students. And this was during the 50s. Yes, a few hundred years ago, over 100 years ago, 150 years ago, we had a civil war because of this issue. The idea of slavery to dominate another the same species, a human being, was out of financial, economic profit, success, to say, basically it was money. So even today, slavery exists. Sex slavery, sex trafficking. Children are used for sex. It's the basic man's desire. Man has not really elevated himself above his to be aware of his desire and where are these desires taking him. And this is why we, in this country, the United States, we have such a problem with weight with people based on desire. We want salty, fatty, oily food. Why? Because our desires are stimulated. Now, this is what I mean, desires. Spinoza says there are three basic emotions called desire, pleasure, and pain. Every desire, we want to go towards pleasure. So everybody wants a Big Mac or a Carl Jr. hamburger. I used to love these things, these foods. But in time, my mind began to awake and realize that it's detrimental to my health. And what can I do? I began to be exposed to a better way to be. Now, there's such a thing, Martin, as reason. Reason helps us see a better way. If we are driven our desires and then we have no, and this is another thing, most people believe they have free will. And so they're willing themselves to do what they do. But how can a child of, say, 6-year-olds begin to throw rocks at or scream and yell at a young teenager of, say, 13 or 14, it could be a boy or girl, going to school? Where does that young child, say 7 or 8, learn that behavior? He is part of a family of prejudice, of hate, of anger. But where does that person, that family, get that hate and anger from? Why? Because they are themselves feel powerless in many ways. And where does this powerlessness come from? A feeling of impotence. Most people do not live in an environment of where they are cared for, loved, feel protected, and feel secure, feel given attention to. So their home environment basically is a toxic environment, and meaning the parents are constantly arguing. There might be a problem with money. So there is a festering of anger in individuals, and they want to find a way to express this discomfort and hate. Who better to express this than someone we already are suppressed? And that is the Afro-American at that time, say in the 50s. Even today, 2017, unfortunately, I find the police to be, there are a lot of good men and women in the police force. And they are there to protect me and others. But there are some who are easily agitated. And that's why when you are stopped by a policeman, do not argue.
Yeah, but Lewis, I mean, for me, let's go back to this. Why is, some family feeling inadequate and insecure? Well, there's more and more reason today for people to feel inadequate and insecure because, the wealth is held by fewer and fewer people, and more of the wealth is held by fewer and fewer people. So more and more people feel economically insecure. And because they feel economically insecure, because they don't have the ability generally to analyze this situation and trying to apply reason, which is a very rare thing, despite the fact we're supposedly creatures of reason, they start to feel inadequate and insecure because that's their conditions for life. Those are the conditions they find themselves in. They don't know how they're going to buy food next week. So they start looking around for a scapegoat. Scapegoat might be coloured people, it might be immigrants, it might be anybody. And of course the governments encourage this kind of thing because it takes the focus off the real cause, which is the grossly distorted distribution of wealth. And so if you blame coloured people or immigrants or whoever, then you're taking the people's eye off the ball. So why are people then, these people in power, not willing to share? Well, because it goes back down to all this desire thing. I am not significant if I don't have $20 billion in the bank. I am not significant if I am not getting more and more money in the bank. This guy over there has got $40 billion in the bank. I feel insignificant compared with him, so I want more. And so this grab for money just seems to increase. And for me, all these things are just driven by the very same things that drive animals. It's just the defending and the acquisition of territory to establish mating rights, to establish superiority, one species over another, and so on and so forth. That's all that's happening. And for me, it's just this primal drive that is essentially blind and stupid that drives everything in that way.
Yes, very good, Martin. And I agree. Desire, however, we go over this idea of what desire is. Uh, Desire in every species is believed is following a good. We desire a good and we want to avoid what is not good. So what is good is to desire to say take care of us, protect us, preserve us, help us exist in life. An individual who desires a good, money, once, for instance, and the country throughout, say, in the world, probably there are millions of people who participate in called the lottery. Why? I've bought lottery tickets many times, and I began to fantasize what I would do with it. Well, I'd probably be very generous. That's nice. But I do want this money, millions of dollars. And so this is desire, and this is a good. Money is a good. However, an individual who has this emotion for money also realizes that he wants more. He wants more of a good thing. A millionaire wants to become a $10 million person. A billionaire wants to be have the most $1 billion. It doesn't cease. Spinoza talks about these particular desires can be excessive. And that's what's happened. The desire for power, the military power. Now our country, the United States, have this idea about what is called imperialism. We want to, say, dominate other countries and get their resources, get their oil, their metals. And we use war. War is another way to for certain individuals to, say, lace their pocketbooks to increase their power, money. So there again, we basic desire good money. It could be with anything. Liquor. Liquor is good. Food is good. Sex is good. Yet it can be excessive. Why is it excessive? Because our desire is so strong that there's nobody home to, and when I say nobody home, there's no I in us. And there's an I that can be called the eye of the understanding. The eye of the understanding now can begin to see our desires. You're talking about blind desires.
Yeah.
Desires are blind.
Yeah.
And when man is blind, Martin, he is taken by his desires, his emotions. He has no control. People believe they have free will, and this is the problem.
Yeah, well, for me, what is happening in the world is exactly what should be happening. Because very, very few people in the world have any, as you would call it, eye of understanding or any sense of reason or sense of control. So the leaders in the world are amassing their own money, amassing their own power. The leaders of corporations are effectively stealing out of the companies that they run most of the time, and so on and so forth. This is completely natural. If you put any kind of other animal in that situation with the mental capability, it would do the same thing, because you see animals behaving that way in their own territories and with their own species. The problem is that man now has such a capability that he can destroy a lot of things at any one time. But again, in my view, that is a completely natural outcome, because there are very, very few people around that have the ability to reason and to think about things in a clear way.
Yes, and you said a natural outcome. I would say it's an automatic law that everything will persist as the best. It depends on their knowledge. So there are individuals who have, say, knowledge to become a millionaire or billionaire. This is economic knowledge. They have financial knowledge. Uh, I would say most citizens in the U.S. and most people in the world are not entrepreneurs. There are a limited class of people who are entrepreneurs who who develop a business, have an idea, develop a business, become very financially successful, but they need people. And this is where I think people can have the power over companies that seem to dominate. Like Monsanto is a good example of a company who goes in to destroys Mother Earth basically with their caustic chemicals. Human nature, once they become dissatisfied with the powers that be, will begin to say, stop buying. Stop buying the cars. Stop buying all the clothes. Stop going to the restaurants. Their desire now is to have more power within the group. But this is going to take time. We might see it in the next 10 years, where there might be, a revolution. We'll see.
Yeah, well, I hope you're right. And I know we want to keep these down to a reasonable length, so I suppose we...
Okay, let's end it. Okay, I appreciate it, Martin. I just wanted to say that to understand what we are doing,
Yeah.
Again, our group, Way of Spinoza, and but the idea is how to understand Gurdjieff and to understand Spinoza. This will elevate us to become conscious of our desires, but we must begin to recognize what they are and where are they taking us.
Yeah.
Thanks, Mark.
Yeah, well, thank you, Lewis. And I suppose the takeaway is that at the end of the day, we can only work on ourselves, and to hell with everything else. Okay, thanks, Lewis.
Thank you, Martin.